Accessible Arts acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land on which we work, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to elders, past and present, and recognise their enduring connection to this land, its culture, and its communities. We honour the long history of storytelling, cultural exchange, and artistic expression that has flourished here for thousands of years. Personally, I would like to acknowledge disabled and deaf First Nations people. Always was, always will be. Hello and welcome to Access Ideas and Insights podcast, brought to you by Accessible Arts. I'm Bedelia Larenchev, and I'll be your host for the next 6 episodes. For any Accessible Arts fans out there, you might have guessed that this podcast was developed as an extension of our Access Ideas and Insights hybrid series. That means we're keeping the bold conversations going, diving into fresh ideas and tackling the big questions around access and inclusion across the arts sector. Each episode, I'll be joined by leading experts, including artists with disability to cultural sector influencers. This podcast is a new initiative for Accessible Arts, and from the start, access has been at the core of its creation. As part of this development, we've worked closely with the Deaf Advisory Group to ensure this series is reaching our audiences. Each episode will be released with a transcript, Auslan video, and captions. Accessible Arts acknowledges access is a place of learning. So, throughout this series, we'll continue to develop the access for the podcast so that we can be a catalyst for change within the arts and cultural sector. In this episode, Alex Jones communicates in Auslan and voiced by an Auslan interpreter, David McQuiggan. You can watch the Auslan version of this podcast featuring Alex on Spotify or the Accessible Arts website. Welcome back to another episode of the Access Ideas and Insights podcast. It's time to talk all things creative partnerships and pathways, where we spotlight groundbreaking programs that are transforming the landscape for artists with disability and those who are deaf, unlocking amazing creative and career opportunities. We're joined by 2 outstanding industry leaders, Alex Jones, Senior Manager Access at Sydney Opera House, and Auslan interpreter David McQuiggan. Then, we'll chat with Jessica Olivieri, artist and co-artistic director of Urban Theatre Projects, also known as UTP. Let's get things started with Alex Jones. Alex, thank you so much for joining today. I'm very excited to talk to you. Your career is long and vast and beautiful. You've worked in business management and industry, in access and advocacy, in art making and theatre. You have so much to offer to this conversation, and I'm really excited to get started.
This is my first Auslan podcast, so I'm very excited to be here and looking forward to share what's been happening to date with my journey and what's brought me to where I am today. So thank you so much for the invitation. I am absolutely honoured to be here. Yeah, just thank you. And I'd like to acknowledge where I am at the moment, the lands that I am coming from, which is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation.
Thank you. Alex, first off, I have to say congratulations. You've recently taken on the role of Senior Manager for Access at the Sydney Opera House. That's a huge achievement, so congrats. But I had a very specific question, which was, what opportunities do you see for building new creative partnerships and pathways that centre artists who are deaf or with disability?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, I still feel it's been just over 3 months. I pinch myself daily, just thinking, wow, I've got this job. And as a deaf person who's been recruited for this role, I'm just amazed. And I just feel like it's the right time, the right thing to do to have a person with a lived experience, a person who has a theatre background that I can bring to the institution as a person with lived experience, the theatre background I can bring to the Opera House, and how the Opera House can thrive and ensure that people with a disability are part of the core of the Opera House, both in the background and in the audience. I feel that I'm able to influence change, influence perspectives, change mindsets in regards to people with a disability. I myself am really excited to introduce an array of improvements, both internally and externally, with the Sydney Opera House. And look, the way I see it is the opportunities for influence and change people's minds and allow people to have aha moments and be more inclusive of people with a disability and allow people with disability to be part of the team, whether that's production or any of the other areas. And disability led production would be a dream. I'm really excited to see opportunities and growth in the area for the arts to be more inclusive at the Opera House. Now, not only that in itself, but looking at how we can make improvements for both the theatre, the shows, the concerts, and all things at the Opera House to be accessible for everyone. I think the vision at the Opera House, which was released last year, is titled Everyone's House. Everyone's House as authentic representation and actual delivery and access for people with a disability across all domains. And I'm really looking forward to achieving that vision for the house, or that vision of everyone's house, breaking down barriers, advocating for bold new projects. For me, I feel like it's groundbreaking. Yeah, it's a journey we're on and it's groundbreaking. And hopefully, doors will open for many more people to come. I see disability led at all levels. It's exciting.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think it's really important that you talk about the disability leadership at all levels. And I think it's fantastic then you stepping into this role because it shows the importance of not just, disabled and deaf storytelling and art, but exactly us in those leadership roles and taking the lead because representation, seeing your community is equally as important. I want to flow through to next question, Alex, which is very much speaking to the strengths you have working across a lot of different sectors. You've worked in corporate, you've worked in government, you've worked in cultural sectors. And I'm curious about how do we better connect those sometimes very different worlds to create sustainable pathways for artists with disability and who are deaf?
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Different experiences for myself, corporate, government, NGOs, artists, cultural institutions. I have had quite a vast journey. And this has supported my understanding of what gaps can be identified and how we can turn those gaps into opportunities. How I can raise awareness, first and foremost. How can I ensure pathways are authentic and genuine and not tokenistic? Let me give you an example. Currently, with accessible arts and bus stop film, those huge organizations demonstrate disability led initiatives, programs, and disability led organizations. And that shows the power of being disability led, that concept, how we can make that happen. I'd love to see more of that. What challenges we do have in this sector is when it comes to funding and grant opportunities. Short term funding opportunities and grants that essentially becomes a bit of a barrier for the arts or artists with disability, deaf artists included. So we need to break down those employment barriers. And how that happens is through attitudes, structural barriers within organizations. I recently attended an employment conference for people with disability, and I must tell you, a lot of the execs, the CEOs, and all those senior level panelists, none of them had a disability or lived experience to demonstrate, which for me shows there is an issue. Now, this is something that's been ongoing for well over 30 years in my experience. So, again, having different levels of employment, having disability led initiatives. I think we have so much untapped opportunity and realization there, and people need to call out the elephant in the room. The problem is the sector needs to have commitment to employ people with disability in the organisations. And that's how we can break ground. And that's how we can create solutions to problems. Yeah, we need to break that down first, get ourselves in the door. And that's my passion, that's my drive that I want to bring to the Sydney Opera House.
Yeah, I think it's so great that you talk about the benefit of understanding all these different sectors is seeing kind of the universal gaps, like what's a repeated barrier and misstep that we need to kind of be working towards. I think that's fantastic to really acknowledge that it's, yeah, repeated and universal, and it's not that different between the arts and between the business sector and government. Like, it's a repeated problem that we need to be addressing. I'm very curious that, oh, yeah, yeah.
Totally. And I must say, the arts and culture sector seems to be a lot more disadvantaged and limited in comparison to other sectors. And the impact on those artists with a disability has twofold or threefold disadvantage in breaking through those barriers, like working full time, for example, having the benefit of a full time salary, working hard. I think, yes, it's a sector wide issue, but I believe that the art sector and cultural sector has even more of a disadvantage.
Yeah, and I think especially then it's quite interesting to look at how major institutions like the Opera House, you know, its role in shifting the landscape specifically for access, inclusion, and leadership in the arts. What are some like specific ways the Opera House is doing that?
One thing the Opera House has done is made a commitment to a barrier free access. The Opera House want to provide opportunities and experiences for everyone, regardless of disability, regardless of whether they're living in a low socioeconomic environment, whether their English is a second language, any barriers. Everyone's house will be barrier free, doesn't matter where they come from. And we want to make sure that it's inclusive and accessible for all. As I mentioned earlier, it's the attitudinal barriers, it's the structural barriers. And I believe that the Opera House acknowledges that there are areas for improvement. And we have a role to say, hey, this is what we've learnt. This is a barrier that we found, and this is how we intend to improve it, to change and thrive. It's such a niche opportunity. And for us to be able to demonstrate a co-design approach where we collaborate with those with lived experience, get a better understanding of the barriers and what they are for those out there, and ensuring that we have sustainable solutions that can be showcased to the whole community to demonstrate what is possible. We all learn from our mistakes, correct? We learn from our wins. And we share that with the community, with the sector, and say, hey, this is what we've done. What are you doing? I am so excited to engage and network with a lot of the larger institutions Australia wide and say, hey, what are you doing? This is what we're doing. Let's share. Let's share our experiences. I think that is such an important and imperative approach to take to ensure that we have a universal approach for artists with disability. Now, it's those storytelling opportunities that are key for us here at the Opera House to share the message through storytelling. And that's what I'm really excited about with my journey here at the Opera House.
I'm very curious because you talk about kind of this partnership model. It seems like a really important part for the independent artist, for community, for these organizations to all be working together. There's something very specific and magical about all working together. What are ways that you would encourage, I'd say first, like an individual artist to think about partnership models?
So, us currently at the Opera House, we have a fantastic program. We have a range of programs in place. One specific example is the Workplace Readiness Program. This program allows recruitment of people with a disability through traineeships and through permanent role offers. So those with an intellectual disability specifically, and those who are neurodiverse. This program has been in place and we can demonstrate the power of making that happen. Staff with a disability becoming permanent employees within the sector has really helped us to break down the barriers and to increase visibility. Like I said before, organisations who commit to hiring a person with a disability can generate more visibility and offer learnings to others. So the commitment comes to the organisation. And just in regards to the question, opportunities that I see that can happen, I am still new. I will bear that in mind, but I'm so excited to plant the seeds and have organizations see what is available, what opportunities can be for artists with a disability, and leadership to be leaders within the arts and cultural institutes, be that production work, be that producers, be the plethora of opportunities that are available. You don't need to come to the Opera House to be able to do it, but we want people with disabilities to be front and center. And that's the commitment that we want, that we're taking. And we want to see opportunities. We want those people with disabilities to produce shows. We don't want the production to be a show in just one city. We want to partner. We want to see other large cultural institutions take this on board and run with it. I want everyone to think big. Don't limit yourself. Think outside the square. Think big, think bold. That production can move to Brisbane, for example. It could go to Melbourne. It can be a traveling show. And we can spread the breadth of work that we have, regardless of costs, regardless of barriers. But we want to have that for all people with disability. That takes time, Bedelia. I will note that. But we are committed to doing that. Now, it's early days, I will say that, but I am so excited to see what we can do. And I see so many opportunities down the track for people with disability.
It's, yeah, beautiful. And I think it's wonderful that you acknowledge that it's a slow growing process, especially like to be building into those institutions that have been around for a while. I'm curious for you specifically in regards to community and culture. How do you find embedding your own practice, arts practice, your own community and culture into an institution? How do you find that experience? And do you have any tips for people who are wanting to kind of work in similar roles to you?
Yeah, a few things come to mind. Embed. Keyword, embedded practice. Let's call it that. Again, it It all comes back to time and commitment. Now, let me give you another example. Programs are said to be developed by a creative team. Okay. Now, the creative team, they come together, they brainstorm, they have ideas, and they develop something, but without real consideration of people with disability or the access needs. So, what we're trying to do is make sure that we change those processes. We encourage a change in that mindset and how production and producers can do things that are different, new, abstract, challenging, fun. And this can be achieved by having people with disabilities at the table to start the conversation. That's an example of what embedded practice looks like. I mean, surely I'm not saying every single program, but certainly a select number to ensure that there is value and meaningful, exemplary performance productions produced by artists with disability. I see that as a huge opportunity.
Talking about like a few years, I'm curious, what do you hope to achieve, 5 years down the track in this role?
My 5 year ambition, I would love to bring everyone's house, our strategy to reality, bring it to fruition. I want people with disability to be front and center, front and back of house. I want to see an increase in accessible performances. And I want to see best practice being demonstrated here for accessible performances, best practice, relaxed performances, best practice in interpreted performances, best practice in audio description, best practice in captioning provision, all of that and more. I think technology now can really revolutionize and grow in the next 5 years. Technology is ever evolving. And I don't think that we can ignore the advances in technology, even AI. I think we need to integrate that to ensure that we have people included in the conversation to encourage change and to definitely drive change.
Yeah, beautiful conversation. I think what really stood out to me is you talked about making, a sort of the ethos for the opera house, it's at everyone's house, making it reality. And I think that's a key takeaway of why we need to have disabled leadership is because the changes that you start now, 5 years down the track, will make it more likely to create a space that is for everyone. I think that's such a fantastic summary of your role and the benefit you will bring to the Sydney Opera House. So thank you so much, Alex. This conversation has been awesome.
Thank you, Bedelia. Thank you.
Next up, Jessica Olivieri. Hi, Jess. Thank you so much for joining today. I'm really excited to chat with you. You have a fantastic role as co-artistic director at UTP, and I've known of you for a while and the fantastic work you do there. I'm very curious though, for some people who mightn't know what a co-artistic director specifically at UTP would do, would you be able to tell us a bit about the role and the work involved and how does it connect with the disability community?
A great question, because I definitely didn't know the answer to that when I started this role, and it was a real journey of understanding what a role like this looks like. I think the short answer is, like, the first thing I did, I'll say I took from my own experience because everyone is different, is thought about what country I'm sitting on when I'm sitting at work. So that's Dara country. And also I thought about what I'm going to do with this power, this privilege, and how I'm going to acknowledge that power and privilege and not sort of dismiss it because I'm uncomfortable with it, because I really was, but how am I going to acknowledge it in the way that we think about systems change? Because you get into a role especially in a small to medium, and you have a lot of power to make change, but it can feel like you have to do it the way that it was always done, which is often why things continue on the way they always were. So the first thing I was really interested in was thinking about shared leadership, and how shared leadership is kinder on the body and the mind, and also therefore on the people in the organization, and also serves more people literally, because more people can relate because there's two rather than one. So if you're thinking about like representation, you can double that representation potentially if you think about how those, who those people are. So I tried to get co-leadership happening straight away. I failed. I wanted to do co-leadership with the general manager, and I think it really scared the board. And it was when I realized that things that I didn't think were particularly radical felt radical for other people, and that I had to do a lot of work to think about who was on my board, how that might change as well over time, and how the hell do I communicate with the board? That was really like a massive leap for me, because in some ways you can get really bogged down by the idea that you've got like 7 or 8 or 9 bosses when you have a board that you're answerable to. And I did some mental gymnastics and started to think about them as mentors. That really helped. But it also helped me think about how to communicate with people to bring them on the journey of systems change. What were the particular conversations that had to be happening with one-on-one with board members? Who was going to think this was radical, and who was going to think this was very normal? And how do I bring that into conversation with the rest of the board? So a lot of thinking at the beginning was really about navigating who I was answerable to, and navigating how to feel comfortable having people answerable to me, and what I wanted to change about all of those dynamics. So the co-artistic director model came about through conversations with Wiradjuri curator Hannah Donnelly, who is the most incredible person to work with. She's on maternity leave at the moment with her second child. So I'm really excited to think about how we make UTP a really gentle landing space for her after her second child. She came on board not long after her first child, and I was also in new motherhood. So my child is 4 at the moment. And I was really interested in the conversations with Hannah about how do we do leadership in bodies that are experiencing new parenthood, that is softer on the body, and that allows for the irregular production timelines. Productivity is very irregular in a new mum, as it is in a body that is experiencing disability, which I also have experience of. So those two things combined really made me think about co-leadership as not being a nice to have, but being an essential. And that's how I essentially won the board over. I won the board over because I was completely burnt out. And I said, I'm going to leave, or we're going to have a co-leadership model. And that wasn't a veiled threat. That was really something that I needed to do in order to survive in a role like this. But also, like from an ideological standpoint, it was something I had always wanted to do. So it was when ideology and practicality met that it was able to happen, which was kind of interesting to think about, in terms of how long it did take me to get the co-leadership happening. It happened at this time where I was like, well, there's no other option for me right now, because this is how it has to be.
Yeah, I think that's so brilliant that you talk about, exactly the intersecting of practicality and just, also like transforming a space to ideology. Like, that's so delicious to hear from, a really well-known arts organisation, that it's possible that we can achieve it, especially in an age where, leadership can be such a difficult thing to understand and know when we can grow the space or not, or like how to grow it and change it.
Yeah. And I really realized that there was a reason why leaders often look the same, because it's really hard sometimes for people with other kinds of experiences to be in those roles. So it was sort of like the conversations with Hannah were very much around, well, what can we do in order to change that, and what is essential in order for us to have different kinds of leaders.
Yeah, exactly. And like, yeah, thinking about how, yeah, your leadership model, yeah, is, yeah, changing for marginalized bodies and then partnering with Hannah to make, yeah, an institution that's, yeah, so different and suited to these marginalized bodies. I really want to focus on UTB's great delivery of programs that focus on access and inclusion. You know, so you've had Crip Brave Theory there by Rihanna Head Toussaint. You've also had Seasons of Care. I'm very curious. I think I have some ideas personally why working with artists with disability might be a priority for you, Jess. But broadly, why is it such a priority for UTP?
I mean, I think it's something that is really obvious to say, but obviously all organizations have audience members who live with disability. And, we all may experience disability in our lives, whether or not that's been something we've experienced from birth or whether or not that's something we experience closer to our end times. So it's not like a foreign concept, although it is spoken about almost as being this sort of other part of society over here. It's very much in the middle. So for me, disability is just like every day something that is a part of my life. And I know for lots of other people with disability, that's just how it is, right? Like it's just part of life. And I think when you stop seeing disability as being something separate in a separate part of the community that is too difficult to accommodate, then you also think about accessibility as being something for people who have grown up or live with a lower socioeconomic situation, or a part of the LGBTIQA plus community, or who are part of the First Nations communities or culturally diverse communities that we work with. So I think for me, like, disability is a very natural, I guess, piece of the puzzle of just who we are as an organization. And I guess when I say that, I mean, I'm very conscious of like, who are the artists we work with, who is the board we have, who's the team we have, and who are the audiences, and that all of those things, all of those groups that I just spoke about, those communities are also very intersectional. So they could also all be in one body. So I guess I'm giving you a very long answer to saying that we work with people with disability because people with disability are part of our community, and because people with disability make incredible art, and because if as the arts, if our remit, if we were to, like, I guess, speak in a kind of funding body speak, if our remit as the arts is to tell a story about who we are as humanity, then we better have like some pretty like different experiences in there speaking and telling who that is. Otherwise, when the aliens come down or when they look at us from above, they're going to be like, oh, so they're all white, able-bodied men.
I love that. I love that analogy. I feel like that'd be so funny to put towards perspective when we think about, yeah, just the overall art, yeah, art sector. Yeah, when the aliens come down, what are they going to see?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, yeah, that's sort of a very roundabout way of saying, as an arts organization, we're very conscious about, I guess, uh, thinking about a broader approach to who makes art, and making sure that we're not just working with the people who are already getting opportunities somewhere else.
Yeah, and I feel like that flows really nicely into the co-design, I feel like, which is such a practice that UTP does. And in your view, like, what makes a partnership between, say, an artist and an organization so significant and effective? Like, why is this co-design approach so juicy?
Yeah. Okay, that's such a good question. I think, first of all, I want to shout out to the UTP team, because the UTP team is incredibly varied in our sort of intersectional experiences in our bodies and in our lives. And I think having that intersectional team means that there's always someone who's like, oh, yeah, but that's not going to work. Or, oh, that's a great idea. Or what about this? So even before we get to the conversation with an artist, we've thought through what it means to work with that particular artist, from 7 different perspectives, because there's 7 of us. So Yeah, a big shout out to the team in like when we start working with an artist, it's often a part of a bigger conversation. It's often part of a conversation about who are we not working with, or what would it mean to work with this person? Does this person already have a lot of support, or what do we imagine they might be dreaming of that we could help with? So then I guess when I come to the conversation with the artist, the we have a lot of we have a lot of development opportunities that where artists are like, oh yeah, but what do you want from me? Like, I'm not just going to hang out and like think about ideas. We're like, no, no, we're just going to hang out and think about stuff. So I think that also allowing us to start from the very beginning at the seeding of an idea means that we can work with artists to build up a project very much from the ground up, which also means that co-design looks like figuring it out together. And then I think the other thing about UTP is because we work across multiple disciplines, we always come to a project with a sense of like, I might not be an expert in this field. So what do you, as the expert of your practice, think the process should be? And we can say, we work long and slow. That also really helps allow for different kinds of processes. I think it comes from knowing that we are working with people who know themselves, and also knowing that knowing yourself also shifts and evolves. So things like access riders, like we always start, particularly when we're working with a really new person who we haven't worked with before, with the conversation about, do you feel comfortable giving us an access rider? And that might mean, and this is what an access rider looks like, or that might mean the person's like, yep, I've got a doc, here you go. But also acknowledging that access rider, because we are human beings and we evolve in our minds and our understandings of ourselves and our situations, that will change along the process, particularly if it's a long process like 3 years.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really beautiful to just articulate that. Yeah, the artist is the expert, and a sort of meeting place between an organisation and the artist is really important for those partnerships. That you can't create a work or be generating new ideas without that sort of meeting place and flexibility and leading, being artist led. And then I love how you always talk about the UTP team as an organisation when partnering is continually asking themselves, how can we support their way of navigating their art? How did UTP find this sort of philosophy? I think, there might be budding organisations that listen to this and want to kind of hear how one can journey to this sort of best practice.
Good question. I think it is something that has evolved through rigor and thinking. All the people who are at UTP, bar one, the incredible Hareen Joel, does not have an artistic practice and has not had one, has no desire to have one, is an incredible unicorn. Everyone has had an artistic practice. So everyone knows what it's like to sit in that space of not knowing with an organization and feel the imbalance of power. That's something that I think is important to know. I think sometimes things can get a little bit sideways when, the natural way of an org to behave is to pretend that we already know everything, and to be kind of experts on everything. And I think if you go in with a bit more curiosity, then it can be really fruitful. I think also just trying new things out and, asking other people, inquiring as to how other people have done things and how it's worked before. But there's no kind of easy answer to that question.
Unsurprisingly. I think it's really awesome that you speak about, I haven't heard anyone really talk about the vulnerability of an organisation and that being a strength, or even putting those two words together. I think when we think of organisations, exactly, they're like this monolithic power that, everything's set and an artist enters and exits. But that vulnerability shapes organisations to be a space to be impacted and informed by the people that come into it.
One thing I thought about a lot when I started was that actually we embody the organization, especially small to mediums. Like, as you would know from working with accessible arts, like we're tiny organizations and we're just made up of the humans. And we might sit within a structure, but that structure might be like just rented and we might have to move one day. So as organizations, we are just people, a cluster of people. And so thinking about if that's the case, then allowing that, we are human beings and human beings are vulnerable and porous, and therefore organizations can be as well.
Fire, Jess, absolute fire. I have one more question that's a bit more specific to a work, and that's Seasons of Care. That was a series that really centered like care and access. I'm curious then, from your perspective, how do we start to embrace creative processes that are sensory, non-linear, or shaped by access?
Yeah, I think that was the exact inquiry that we began with that project. So each year, that might have been the first year we did it. For a while now, we have a provocation that we use to sort of drive us as an inquiry through the year. So that isn't just about inviting artists to think about that, but it's also as an organization thinking about it. So with Season of Care, we had these incredible artists in residence, but we also thought about what that meant within the organization. So we began things, and they're not finished, but things like making our contracts more accessible, instigating like what does an access writer look like, and how could we have that conversation with an artist. We now have like a new constitution that will become pictorial, so it's like it's always about beginning something. Like we don't end that inquiry at the end of the year, but it's about like a really deep dive into that inquiry. And Season of Care was post the lockdowns of COVID, where care was like this ubiquitous term that everyone was using. Everyone suddenly realized or experienced to a degree, to some degree, what it might feel like to have some kind of housebound experience of disability. And things opened up, right? Like Zooms and like team meetings became completely normal. Things were live streamed, which for the first time, for a lot of the disability community, particularly housebound disability community, had been like calling out for, and suddenly it was so easily available. So I was really conscious that we were in almost like a post-care dialogue at that point. And what does that mean? And how do we make sure that we really embed the learnings from that experience of lockdowns into our organizations and into thinking about how we make art, so that we don't lose that knowledge, and so that I think this has happened to a degree, and I think many people within the housebound kind of chronic illness space would feel this sense of betrayal, because for a lot of organizations they have gone back to business as usual offline, and to a degree so have we. So I'm not calling out, we also this year didn't have a digital offering for the first time, and that's something that we want to do again next year, because we're like, oh, we don't want to do that again. So, like getting it wrong sometimes, like knowing that sometimes we can't always do it all as well. But I think that Season of Care was really about how do we embed the rhetoric, so that it's not just rhetoric, so that it is actually things that are useful for people. And also something that I've thought a lot about is when you embed accessibility into an artwork from the very, very beginning, it's not as separate from the work. So it becomes in the work, and it becomes really exciting experimental space for how to make art, and also how to, because art's for the most part, for not everybody, is about communication. So if we are thinking about how we embed accessible forms of communication into an artwork, that's a really exciting, fertile space for experimentation. So that was also the beginning point for the group of artists who we're working with. So the first thing we did, it was a lot of online work at the beginning, was work with Imogen Yang and think about what would it mean to embed Oh, actually, that was a different project. That was Dream Sequence. This was the prequel, I guess, to thinking through. But what would it mean to embed audio description into work so that it wasn't an add-on, so that it wasn't separate to, so that it was part of everyone's experience. We did the same thing with Imogen again at the beginning season of Care. We thought about what are some things that can be embedded within a practice, an artistic practice, that then mean that the experience of that as an audience member is a really accessible experience because those things have been considered from the beginning.
I think it's really awesome to hear how UTP is seeding curiosity and creativity into the institutional practices. I think that's such such a core. I don't know, as an outsider and as someone who is a visitor and a guest in UTP spaces, I think that's something that is so critical to the enduring work that UTP does. I know I'm grateful for UTP. This is just to become a UTP love letter. I don't know what's happened.
We stated that we're only as good as the artists that we work with, and we work with really incredible artists. And obviously the team is incredible, but the artists that we work with, I feel really lucky that we have their trust, and it's on us as an organization to earn that trust. And so I think, it's exciting when the trust starts to feel like it's been built, and when people start coming to you because they feel like you're an organization that will be safe, obviously in inverted commas, or safer. And that makes me super excited.
Yeah. Well, I really hope there are institutions or organizations, new or old, that listen into this conversation, because I think the seeding of curiosity and care and exactly a position of reaching out and knowing that trust has to be built is such a wonderful ethos that you carry, Jess, and the rest of the UTP team. That is all our time. It went so quick. Thank you so much for chatting today, Jess. It's been a hoot.
Thanks so much for having me. It's lovely to chat.
That's a wrap on this episode of Access Ideas and Insights. This podcast is proudly produced by Accessible Arts and Kiera Brew, with sound design by Tralala Blip. Access consulting was provided by Macro Impact Consulting and our advisory group. We also thank our Auslan interpreters. This podcast series is proudly supported by the City of Sydney and Create New South Wales, the principal funding partner of Accessible Arts.